We are starting now with a new judge, a very different story than in many ways, and very, very interesting story, I believe. And we kind of laid the groundwork for that last week when we read the end of chapter 10, and we see that that they go back to their bad ways, and they start worshiping idols, etc. And if you'll notice in chapter 10, verse 9, we have the beginning of the trouble. I mean, we have, first of all, the fact that, first in verse 7, and the Lord incensed with Israel, surrendered them to the Philistines and the Ammonites. And then in verse 9, the Ammonites also crossed the Jordan to make war on Judah, Benjamin, and the house of Ephraim. Israel was in great distress. So we see now a situation where the whole nation of Israel, both on the eastern side of the Jordan, which is the area, the natural area of Ammon, and also to the west even, there is this influence of the Ammonites really persecuting and occupying Israel. And they cry, the nation cries to God, and he says, well, look, look at what you've done. You've gone back to all your idols, go ask them to help you. And in the end, of course, they realize that they have sinned and they remove all their idols. And then that brings us to verse 17 of chapter 10, which of course is the background of exactly what we're going to be dealing with in chapter 11. The Ammonites mustered and they encamped in Gilead. Gilead is in the part of the tribe of Manasseh that's on the eastern part of the Jordan. And the Israelites massed and they encamped at Mitzpah. The troops, the officers of Gilead, said to one another, let the man who was the first to fight the Ammonites be chieftain over all the inhabitants of Gilead. So basically what's happening, we have all the people of Gilead, and they are trying to amass an army in order to go up and fight against the Ammonites who are, about to attack them. But they're looking for a leader. They're looking for someone who will lead the troops. And they're looking for somebody who is it? Who's going to do this? Who's willing to do this? They're basically looking out who's willing to lead the charge amongst our nation. Okay, and then it starts with chapter 11, and we meet this fellow, Yiftach. Yiftach himself is from Gilad. He's part of the same group. Gilad is not just a location. It means they're all part of the same tribe. They're all part of that half of Manasseh that lives on the eastern part of the Jordan. So it says he was a very brave man. He was a warrior. He was, and this is very, very, let's pay attention to all the details we have here because they all are very significant. He was the son of a prostitute. Jephthah's father was Gilead, but Gilead also had sons by his wife. And when the wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephthah out. They said to him, you shall have no share in our father's property, for you are the son of an outsider. So Jephthah fled from his brothers and settled in the Tov country. Men of low character gathered about Jephthah and went out raiding with him. Okay, so first of all, in many ways, the introduction of Jephthah reminds us of the introduction of Avimelech. Avimelech is the son, if you remember, we really did not like Avimelech. He's a really bad sort. But their backgrounds are very similar because like Yiftach, Avimelech was the son of and here it says prostitute. It can be a prostitute. It can also be a concubine, whatever it is. In both cases, these are sons not of the official legal wife or wives of the person, but rather sons of a lesser wife, or either a prostitute or a concubine. And what happens is that the brothers who are part of the legal wife, there's a separation between them and Avimelech. What Avimelech does as a result, of course, is murder all his 70 brothers. What Jephthah does is he leaves. They drive him out. They say, we don't want to have anything to do with you. He does not plan revenge against them. He leaves. Okay, and what does he do? He goes to a place called Tov. Tov is very interesting because Tov literally means good. So if you translate this, it means the land of good. But what does that mean? Okay, so different people have different, some people say, well, Tov, it happens to be the name of a part of the country. It doesn't have a significant meaning. But if you see what happens afterwards, most people have a sense that this place itself is a place that's, let's say, out of the center. It's the wilderness. It's the outskirts. Okay, which of course fits what Yiftach is doing, what Jephthah is doing. He was driven out from the center. He's driven out from where everybody's living, from the center, from the civilization, and he goes out somewhere into the wilderness. And so it's ironic, if you ask me, the land of good being this wilderness. I don't know what's good about it. Is it ironic, or is it that you have the ability to start something new and something good because you're going away from civilization? Now, what actually happens, though, is that he gathers around him all kinds of, it says, my English says men of low character, but what the literal translation is empty people. Empty. What do you mean empty people? Well, they certainly don't have, or at least you would assume, they don't have positive characteristics. And you have a sense that if indeed he's going out to this wilderness, this place beyond civilization, who is he gathering around him? People that have nothing else to do. It could be just a bunch of outsiders, other people that have been thrown away from their families, maybe criminals, maybe, whatever, people that aren't able to abide by rules, people looking for something out there, okay? And these are the people he gathers around him. Now, it reminds us in many ways of a similar situation with David in 1 Samuel. After David flees for his life because Saul is starting to, is running after him, he comes to, and this is 1 Samuel chapter 22. David, one second. David departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam, and when his brothers and all his father's house heard, they joined him down there. Okay, so his brothers joined him, but who else joins him? Everyone who was in straits, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was desperate joined him, and he became their leader. There were 400 men with him. So David gathers around him a militia of 400 men who were down and out types of people. They had debts, they couldn't make it, they may have been petty criminals, all kinds of people who have nowhere else to go. And therefore, it is easy for David to say, okay, I'll be a leader, I'm going to give you a job. And in turn, what happens is he becomes a leader of this militia, which he uses for various purposes. Well, we're not just learning the book of Samuel today, that's a different story, but we have a sense here that is very similar. Jephthah goes out, he gathers around him, he needs something to do. He's a strong man, he's a warrior, and he gathers these people around him who have nothing better to do. So basically, what he puts together is a little army of his own, and they go out raiding. They go out, they raid, whatever they are. Are they plundering innocent people? Who knows? Are they Robin Hoods? Who knows? But it's certainly this. It doesn't sound like a very savory group of people, okay? But clearly, he's developed a relationship, a reputation for himself as somebody who is strong and has men behind him. Okay, so now we skip to the next part of the story. Sometime later, the Ammonites went to war against Israel. Now, is this the same war that we're talking about in the end of chapter 10, or is it a different war? It's not clear, but it's certainly, if at most, it's a different battle, part of the same war, okay? And when the Ammonites attacked Israel, the elders of Gilead went to bring Jephthah back from this Tob area, okay? And they go, so basically, it's probably what is going on is in what we see in verse 17 is that they assemble on the border, the Ammonites, and the Israelites are there, and they say, who will be the head for us? And clearly someone steps up and they have a battle, okay? But now the Ammonites come again and they are fighting against them, and they realize that whoever they had before didn't do a very good job. They didn't defeat the Ammonites. They're still in a similar situation. So they're looking for a better solution. Now, anybody who's going to go look for someone like a Jephthah, an outsider, an outcast with a band of merry men or whatever around him, okay, you can imagine that this is not an ideal situation. They must be desperate because they have an organized group of people. They were just looking for a leader. Whatever it was, they didn't do as good a job. So they must be desperate to go to Jephthah, okay? And so they begin a negotiation with him. And they say to him in verse 6, come and be our chief, lead us into battle. Okay, now, there is a difference of the word used in Hebrew. In verse 18, at the end of chapter 10, when the Gileads are looking for someone to lead them, they say, you will be our head. The word is used as rosh. You will be our head, total head, okay? And here, when they're turning to Jephthah, they don't offer them a head, they offer them something called a katzin. A katzin is an officer, okay? What's the difference? You're offering one person to be your prime minister, and the other one you're offering to be your chief of staff. Your prime minister, or let's say your minister of defense, okay? Your minister of defense is a much higher, more, important job. So initially, when the Gileads look for anybody from their tribe who would take this over, they're looking for a real head of the whole tribe who's going to lead the battle, but not just lead them into battle, just lead the whole group, okay? Lead them. Here, they're not willing to give him that big title initially. They said, no, we want you to be an officer. We want you to come in for this very limited position. We have a problem with Ammon. It is a limited problem. We need you to fight our battle. We're not turning you into our leader. We need you to fight our battle, okay? So then what does he say? Jephthah replies to him. He says, you are the very people who rejected me and drove me out of my father's house. How can you come to me now when you're in trouble? Okay, he's not so quick. He has a lot of issues with these people. They dump him, and then when they need him, they come and ask him. And when they come and ask him, they don't ask him to be a head. They just want him to fight their battle and then go back to being an outcast. Okay? So what do the elders of Gilead say to him? Honestly, we have now turned back to you. If you come with us and fight the Ammonites, you shall be our head. Okay? Suddenly, now when they come back to him, they say, not that you will be a katzin, you will be an officer, you will be a rosh, you will be a head. Now, unfortunately, the English translation, at least in my Bible, does not appropriately designate between these different things. It's very loose. It loosely translates it, but if you look in the Hebrew, it's very specific. The other people, they say you can be a rosh, you can and a head. To Jephthah, they initially only offer him to be an officer. And now when he rejects them and says, well, why are you coming to me now? They must realize it's not just that they came to him now, but what they offered him itself was very insulting. And so they modify their offer. And they said, no, you will be a head over all the inhabitants of Gilead, not just taking us into war. You will be our leader. Okay? Yeah. And at that point, he says, very well, if you bring me back to fight the Ammonites and the Lord delivers them to me, I will be your leader. Okay? And so we can see that this becomes part of, you pay attention to the words, this becomes part of the discussion. What exactly are they asking Jephthah? And Jephthah says, I'm not coming in just to do you a favor. If you value me, then you will make me your leader. And then I will fight you. But I'm not just coming in to fight one battle and then you throw me back out again as an outcast. And they agree. Okay, they said, the elders in verse 10, the elders of Gilead answered Jephthah, the Lord himself shall be witness between us. We will do just as you have said. Okay, and then again, it's repeated in chapter 11. Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead and the people made him their head and their chief and their officer. Both words are used here. He becomes a rosh and a katzin. He becomes their leader and their officer, which is exactly what he needed. Okay, now you could say, is he just playing ego here? Okay, that's one way of interpreting it. Another way of interpreting is to say, look, he is being asked by these people to lead them into battle. He cannot effectively lead them into battle if he is not seen as their authoritative head. If the whole tribe has not honestly and wholeheartedly accept him as their leader, not just, take this job and do it. Because a military leader has to be able to say to his troops, after me, we're going into battle. We are going to risk our lives. We are risking our lives to save the nation. But if these people, these troops, do not trust their leader, then it won't work. And so this interpretation is basically saying what Jephthah was looking for was a vote of confidence in his leadership, not in just how well can he strategize a particular battle. And that is, of course, what he ends up getting. Okay, now we'll see what happens. So before he goes into battle, and this is something, there's a lot of very good qualities that you see here in Jephthah. Okay, he is not a warmonger. You may think from previously the kinds of people that he gathers around him, all these sort of empty people, you may think that he himself is empty, but he's not empty at all. Because what he's going to do now is to try to avoid war. He's going to send messengers to the Ammonites and to try to dissuade them from going to war. So he says to them, what have you against me that you've come to make war on my country? He says, what's your problem? And the king of the Ammonites replied to Jephthah's messengers, when Israel came from Egypt, they seized the land which is mine from the Arnon to the Yabok as far as the Jordan. Now then restored peaceably. Ammon is coming and saying, this part of the land that is now part of Israel, part of Gilead, is part of the area that is the half of the tribe of Manasseh. Okay, he claims that it's really his, and that when the children of Israel came out of Egypt, they seized that land. Now you may remember, we're going to go back and look at this in a minute. You may remember that there was a very definite instruction from God when the nation of Israel, already on the eastern side of the Jordan, before they crossed the Jordan under Joshua, already on the eastern side of the Jordan, there are some battles. And there's a very specific instruction given to the nation of Israel. You are not to fight against Ammon, you are not to fight against Moab, and you are not to fight against Edom. Why? These are your relatives, these are your brothers. Ammon and Moab are descendants of Lot, who is Abraham's nephew, and Edom is descendants of Esau, who is Jacob's brother. These are our brothers. Their land was given to them. You have to protect it. And so indeed what happens when the children of Israel are needing to cross that land in order to cross the Jordan and get into the land of Israel, they approach these different nations and they said, we don't want to fight you, but we just want, can you give us water? Can you give us bread? And in all these cases, they said no. And so what Israel did is they did not fight those three nations. They went around those three nations, okay? So this is an interesting question. What is he talking about? We know that the nations went around Moab, so how is it here that the king of Ammon is talking about Moab and Ammon and the fact that we conquered them? Well, Jephthah understands exactly what he's talking about, and he responded. He says, Israel did not seize the land of Moab or the land of the Ammonites. When they left Egypt, Israel traveled through the wilderness to the Sea of Reeds and went on to Kadesh. Israel then sent messengers to the king of Edom, saying, allow us to cross your country, but the king of Edom would not consent. They also sent a mission to the king of Moab, and he refused. So Israel, after staying at Kadesh, traveled on through the wilderness, skirting the land of Edom and the land of Moab. They kept to the east of the land of Moab until they encamped on the other side of the Arnon. And since Moab ends at the Arnon, they never entered Moabite territory. Okay, so we have this river called the Arnon River, and that's a river that goes from west to east or east to west, and it is a border, okay? And what Jephthah is saying is that they circled the land of Ammon and Moab until they got to north of the Arnon River, and only then did they start a war. What they happen, and then we're continuing on the story. Then Israel sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites, the king of Heshbon. Israel said to him, allow us to cross through your country to our homeland. And in this case, the Amorites did not allow them to cross, and therefore, it says here, Sichon mustered all his troops and they encamped at Yahaz. He engaged Israel in battle. But the Lord, the God of Israel, delivered Sichon and all his troops into Israel's hands, and they defeated them. And Israel took possession of all the land of the Amorites, the inhabitants of that land. Thus they possessed all the territory of the Amorites from the Arnon to the Abok, from the wilderness to the Jordan. Okay, so basically, Jephthah's putting him right. He says that may have once been Moabite territory, but we did not, capture this from the Moabites. We captured it from the Amorites. Okay, and it continues. Okay, let me stop there for a second and let's go back to the book of Numbers where this story actually takes place. In the book of Numbers, chapter 21, we have here, chapter 21, verse 21. Israel now sent messengers to Sichon, king of the Amorites, saying, let me pass through your country. We will not turn off into fields or vineyards. We will not drink water from wells. We will follow the king's highway until we have crossed your territory. But Sichon would not let Israel pass through his territory. Sichon gathered all his people and went out against Israel in the wilderness. He came to Yahaz and engaged Israel in battle. But Israel put them to the sword, took possession of their land from the Arnon to the Abok, as far as the Ammonites, for as marked the boundary of the Ammonites. Israel took all those towns, and Israel settled in all the towns of the Amorites in Heshbon and all its dependencies. Now look at verse 26. This is very interesting. Now Heshbon was the city of Sichon, king of the Amorites, who had fought against a former king of Moab and taken all his land from him as far as the Arnon. So basically what happened was the area north of Arnon had once belonged to another king of Moab, but came along the Amorites and conquered the whole area of Moab north of the Arnon and now became part of the Amorites. Now that battle that is described in verse 26 must have been a very spectacular battle, because it says there, starting in verse 27, we're still in the book of Numbers, in verse 27 it says as follows, therefore the bards would recite, come to Heshbon, firmly built and well-founded is Sichon city, for fire went forth from Heshbon, flame from Sichon city, consuming are of Moab, the lords of Bamoth by the Arnon. Woe to you, O Moab, you are undone, O people of Chemosh. His sons are rendered fugitives, his daughters captive by Amorite king Sichon. Yet we have cast them down utterly, Heshbon along with Yvonne. So basically, what we have here in Numbers is a song of victory, not now, that was sung then when that previous king of Moab was defeated by the Amorites. And that is seen as such a spectacular victory that these bards, the bards of the Amorites, or of all those nations, would sing about this amazing, amazing victory of the Amorites against Moab. Why is that so important? I mean, first of all, I think it's very interesting that it's put there in the book of Numbers, talking about a war that precedes the war that Moses is about to enter into against the Amorites, who have captured what was originally Moabite land. But you get a sense by putting in this victory poem, and we have victory poems, of course, that are Israelite victory poems singing to God. You have a sense whenever there's this victory poem, especially this one, it seems so amazing. This victory is so stunning. You have to ask yourself, is there a divine hand in this victory? Now, it's clear that the people that were singing this victory song, they believe in Chemosh. They are pagans. They believe in the gods of Moab and Ammon and the Amorites. However, for us, why is that victory song put in our Bible? As if to signal to us, this is a very unusual, amazing victory. God's hand is in that. And this is something that we now see Jephthah referring to when he continues in his discussion of the situation. So let's look at verse 23, back in our chapter 11, Judges, verse 23. Now then the Lord, the God of Israel, dispossessed the Amorites before his people Israel. And should you possess their land? Jephthah brings back that same idea that we have in the book of Numbers. This was a stunning victory by the Amorites over the Moab. And here, basically, Jephthah is saying that is a victory that had God's hand in it to enable us, the children of Israel, to take this land. The land that belongs to Moab, Ammon, and Edom, we cannot take. But if God already gave this part of Moab to the Amorites, that means that God already back then realized that this is land that he wants for the Israelites. And therefore, he enabled the Amorites to defeat the Moabites in that section so that it would be land that the nation of Israel would be able to conquer, and indeed successfully conquer, back in Moses' time. And that is essentially what Jephthah is saying here. This is something that God has done. And then how does he then follows that up with an amazing quip against their pagan beliefs. He says, do you not hold what Chemosh your God gives you to possess? So we hold on to everything that the Lord our God has given us to possess. He says, if you believe Chemosh gave you what you have, and if you lost it, that must mean your God Chemosh wanted you to lose it. Okay, so he kind of turns it around to their thing. He says, therefore, we have to hold on to what God gave us, the God of Israel gave us to inherit. Okay, and then he goes on. Are you any better than Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab? Did he start a quarrel with Israel or go to war with him? And of course, this is referring to Balak, who was also the king of Moab, and who hires Balaam in order to curse the nation of Israel. And he totally fails. So he's reminding him, Balak thought that he could outsmart the God of Israel, and he failed. Don't you, the king of Ammon, who is allied with Moab, don't you think that you can outsmart or outwit the God of Israel? And then he goes on to this. He says, verse 27, there's another thing. Well, Israel's been inhabiting Heshbon and its dependencies and Arah and its dependencies and all the towns along the Arnon for 300 years. This, by the way, gives us a wonderful dating. And if we figure the period of judges in general is close to 400 years, okay? So Moses' battle is just before they enter the land of Israel, and the period of Joshua is roughly 20 years, okay? That's 300 years later, so we can assume that this is towards the end of the period of the judges, okay? 300 years has passed. That means it's about 280 years from the beginning of the period of the judges. It's clearly towards the latter third, let's say, of period of judges. That's an interesting dating function for us. And then he ends up, I've done you no wrong, yet you are doing me harm and making war on me. May the Lord who judges decide today between the Israelites and the Ammonites. So Jephthah makes it very, very clear. The result of this war is going to determine what God wants. We win, God. You win, Chemosh. It is very interesting that he puts it in that perspective, which of course it ends up giving the ability for this war not just to be a battle, but to be representing a spiritual battle as well. Okay, and then we have here verse 29. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah. He marched through Gilead and Manasseh, passing Mitzvah of Gilead, and from Mitzvah of Gilead crossed over to the Ammonites. Okay, this is very interesting because unlike the other judges, we have a very different situation here. The other judges, if you look back, to the end of chapter 10, we have God saying to them, you were wrong, therefore I sent these people to hurt you. Then we have in verse 15 and 16 that the nation of Israel repents, okay? And you have in 17 and 18, the battle is getting ready for the Ammonites. If this would have been written like all the other stories, we would then have a verse that would say something like this. And then the Lord raised up a savior for Israel, and he sent them to lead the battle against the Ammonites. But that's not what happens. Chapter 11 is all about the tribe, the Gileads, the tribe of Manasseh, and how they choose somebody. There is no divine intervention in this whole selection process. They turn to Jephthah, they have a negotiation, Jephthah agrees, and then Jephthah starts the negotiation with the Amorites. And only after all of that happens, after, at the very end of his discussion, his negotiation, Jephthah says, may the Lord who judges decide today between the Israelites and the Ammonites, Only after that do we read in verse 29, then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah. So God chooses Jephthah after he's proven himself in this little discussion. He lets the people work these things out, and then God will decide, is this the person that I am going to inspire, that I'm going to give him that extra power in order to lead the nation? And this also makes a lot of sense, because if you think about it, the way that we described Jephthah at the beginning, this fellow who's been thrown out of his tribe and who is gathered around him, these empty people, this would not necessarily seem to be the kind of person that God would raise up as a leader. And so it is a process that Jephthah is going through himself in order to become worthy of being that leader that God is going to appoint. Is there one more thing I wanted to say? Oh yeah, one more thing I wanted to say. We kept talking about Ammonites, and then I kept throwing in the Moabites. And it's Ammon that they're leading the discussion with, but we know that the whole area of land they're talking about is land that never belonged to the Ammonites. It is land that the Amorites took from the Moabites. So are we talking about the Ammonites, or are we talking about the Moabites? Okay, but what we can see, especially if we look here at the beginning of the book of Judges, if we look at Judges chapter 3, we can already see here, Judges 3, chapter 3, verses 12 and 13, we can already see that at the beginning of this period, there is a unity and alliance between Moab and the Ammonites. And this is during the time of the first judge, Othniel. And it says, because they did what was offensive to the Lord, the King Eglon of Moab prevailed over Israel. Eglon brought the Ammonites and the Amalekites together under his command and went and defeated Israel. So already here we see that Eglon, the king of Moab, is able to bring the Ammonites in with him to do this battle and to do whatever he's doing. And it is understood that throughout this period, both of those two nations, Moab and Ammon, are working together and allied in this way. So that's really, helps us understand what's going on here, that we are talking with Ammon, but it involves as well the territory that was originally Moab. Okay, so that's all for today. Of course, we're going to be continuing the story of Jephthah, and I stopped right before verse 30, which is when he makes his vow, and that, of course, opens up a whole different issue. What is this vow and the terrible consequences of it? But that's what we'll be dealing with next week. So unmute yourselves if you like. If anyone has any comments or questions, I'd love to hear them.
Jane and Gina, can you guys hang on afterwards?
Okay. Anybody have any comments or questions? I think, Diane, you had raised your hand at one point. Do you have something?
It was just that the King James Version does make a distinction between leader and captain. All the way.
I'm happy to hear that. I'm happy to hear that.
All the way.
Okay, good. That's excellent. My translation doesn't, and that's, these English translations, sometimes they're good and sometimes they're not, and it's inconsistent, so I feel privileged that I know Hebrew, and I can therefore always take a look and see what is the Hebrew, and to the extent that the English in this particular case fits.
That is true.
Stone Tanakh also makes a difference between leader and.
Good. Okay, I'm glad. Between leader and chief or officer or something like that.
And
good.
Chief,
Sondra, could I just go a bit off topic? Could I just my wife and I were discussing about the forthcoming election, and we're wondering, on average, how many eligible voters vote in an election, or is it getting election fatigue? And do you have a take on the upcoming election?
Okay, a take on the coming election you will receive in your email tomorrow. I am working on it now, and I will be finishing it tomorrow, and you will get it in your email. So that's my take on the election. Look out for that. And as far as voter turnout, they are seeing a slight decrease in voter turnout in any one. This is the 5th election in 3 years. 3.5 years, and they are seeing a decrease in voter turnout. And one of the things that all of the parties are working on very, very hard is to try to get people out to vote. You know, there's a lot of confusion, a lot of disgust, you know, with our political leaders. And therefore, it's not just election fatigue. There's also a question of like, who should I vote for? Because none of them are any good.
Yeah.
And of course, the important thing is to realize if you don't vote, then you're abdicating the field to the people you least want to be in. So even if you have to go to the polls holding your nose, or you have to go to the polls, you know, saying, well, you know, this is who I need to vote for, whether or not it will make a difference. That's what you have to do. But these are the issues. And of course, we won't know for a few days. Tomorrow night at 10 o'clock, the polls close, and therefore the exit polls are only publicized at 10 o'clock on Tuesday. And then they start the count. And by the morning, we will have a certain percentage of the real vote counted. By, I would say, midday on Wednesday, we will have a pretty good idea who, you know, which party's got how many seats. That doesn't mean we will know who will have a government. That will become a process of negotiation. And also, there are votes that are counted later. We do not have absentee ballots in this country, but there are people who don't vote in the normal way. Those are soldiers who vote at their bases, okay? And those are people who are hospitalized that vote in their hospitals. And there are the diplomats, official diplomats who around the world who vote. Those envelopes are always counted after the whole vote is counted to make sure nobody has double voted. Okay, these are people, in other words, everyone is assigned to a particular voting station. So when they open those other envelopes, they have to first make sure that that person didn't vote twice, once on their base and then again, you know, so they do that process and then they count those votes. And in the past, those votes can make a difference, you know, one seat here or there. And it's only after they count those do they really have, you know, the final version. But usually there's a decent picture. By Wednesday morning, we should have a decent understanding of where we stand. Yes, Lynn, what did you want to ask?
Thank you.
Will you be doing your monthly update that you were doing on Tuesday mornings on the first?
Yes, I will be doing that next week.
Next week, not tomorrow.
No. It's always the second Tuesday, and it's next week. And in fact, it was a very good date because by that time it'll be a week after the elections, and I will certainly have a better understanding at that point of where we stand. And that will be the subject of that update. You know, the results of the elections and where we go from here. That is what we will be discussing on November 8th.
I hope you enjoyed that film. And we have lots more film content and emails and articles that I'm sure you will enjoy as well. Check out our website at CFOIC.com and subscribe to our newsletter. You can do that right from the homepage. I know you will really enjoy the content that will land in your inbox on a regular basis. Hope to see you soon.